wheat, rye, millet, oats, barley and maize. We cannot live by bread alone, but could we live without it? How much energy would you say there was stored in wheat flour? Enough energy to destroy this grain silo. Where did that energy come from? How was it stored? And how was it released? These plants look a little underdeveloped because they've been grown in the dark. So what happens if we switch on the artificial daylight? The plant soon gets its colour back and outgrows its neighbour in the shade. But let's take a closer look at them. Take 5 grams of leaves, blend in 100 centimetres cubed of water, and then analyse. What kinds of differences would you expect to find between the two plants? The plant that was exposed to light contains more chlorophyll, and also contains a much larger amount of starch, a carbohydrate that plants use to store chemical energy. Flour consists mainly of starch, and under certain conditions, if the flour is oxidized very rapidly, there is an explosive release of that energy. So it's the energy in sunlight that is somehow converted by the plants into chemical energy. How do they do it? The secret is in the colour green. The small green particles moving around inside these plant cells are called chloroplasts. They contain the green pigment chlorophyll that we found in the leaves of the plants that were analysed. And chlorophyll is the key to the complex process of photosynthesis. It would be very difficult to examine this process out here in this field. A greenhouse provides a more controlled environment. This is what happens during the day. Changes occur in the plants and also in the greenhouse environment around them. What does this mean? All these events are related, and they are all part of photosynthesis, which starts with chlorophyll. This amazing substance has the ability to absorb the energy in sunlight and use it to split water, which the plant draws up from its roots into its leaves. The formula for water is H2O. When water splits, it does so unevenly, and the eventual outcome is oxygen and hydrogen. The hydrogen then reduces carbon from carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to form simple sugars, which can either be stored as starch or they can be oxidized, releasing their chemical energy to provide fuel for the plant's growth. So, it's photosynthesis that stores up the energy in a field of grass, in a herd of cows, in a pine forest, in a seam of coal, a field of oil, or in a peanut. How would you measure the energy in a peanut? And how many would you eat to replace the 10,000 kilojoules that you use up every day? Back to the greenhouse. Now we know what happens during the daylight hours, but what happens at night? Do the plants go into suspended animation? Do they fall asleep like animals do? What happens in a greenhouse after dark? Remember the day shift? That's photosynthesis. But what happens after dark? This isn't photosynthesis. During the night, the plant's starch content falls. Levels of oxygen in the greenhouse also fall, while carbon dioxide rises. Sound familiar? The starch is being burnt as fuel, but very slowly. Watch these bean plants. During the day, the leaves are raised towards the sun to photosynthesize. At night, the leaves fall, but day and night, oxidation goes on to fuel plant growth. The growth of plants and animals depends on a special, slow form of oxidation, which is called respiration. The most violent and uncontrolled form of oxidation is explosive. Halfway between respiration and explosion, you have burning. The chemical energy locked into wood or coal is transferred by rapid oxidation into heat energy. The heat energy is then used to change water into steam, generating kinetic energy which drives the wheels of the train. Look closely. There are two oxidizing systems in this picture. Do you know what they are? It's not that obvious, but the train driver gets his energy in much the same way as the train, even though he is not oxidizing his fuel quite so rapidly. Plants use photosynthesis to store energy and respiration to release it again. But animals depend on respiration. People do not have chloroplasts, and they cannot photosynthesize. Otherwise, next time you felt hungry, all you would have to do is take a sunbath. So, because we cannot produce our own carbohydrates, we must get them from plants. And then, like the plants, we use respiration to release the chemical energy the carbohydrates contain, which means stopping every now and then to refuel with the chemical energy contained in food. These intrepid children seem to be eating everything in sight. All of these fuels must be oxidized to release the energy they contain. And this is where digestion comes in. Digestive enzymes break down all the carbohydrates in our diet to one key substance, glucose. The oxidation of glucose, which releases its chemical energy, is respiration, and it uses oxygen. This is called aerobic respiration, and the end products are carbon dioxide and water. If there is not enough oxygen available, the glucose can only be partly broken down. This is anaerobic respiration. It isn't as efficient as aerobic respiration, and it leaves various byproducts. The main anaerobic byproduct in humans is lactic acid. When too much lactic acid builds up, the muscles get sore and tired. This is nature's way of telling you to stop. There is another byproduct of anaerobic respiration. Humans don't make this, otherwise you'd fall over every time you ran for a bus. Yes, it's alcohol, and when beer is being brewed, anaerobic respiration is more commonly called fermentation. Beer begins with barley, which contains large quantities of starch. As the barley begins to germinate, the starch is broken down to sugars to fuel the growth of the new barley plant. The brewers use germinated barley or malt because of its high sugar content. It is the sugars which will be oxidized anaerobically to alcohol. the malt is ground up and added to the brew. Then hops are added to give the beer its flavour. Finally, the brewer adds yeast. Yeast contains the enzymes needed to oxidise the sugars contained in the malt. If there was too much oxygen, aerobic respiration would break the sugar down to water and carbon dioxide. What can be done to prevent that from happening? The brewer closes the fermentation vessels to reduce the amount of oxygen. Respiration is anaerobic, and the end product is alcohol. The total energy content of the beer consists of both alcohol and unfermented sugar. It's important for the brewer to know how strong the beer is, and to do this, he measures the alcohol content with a hydrometer. Now you know how animals and plants process and store energy. How would you build a food chain from these ingredients? Here's a food chain we prepared earlier, beginning with the sun. Plants use photosynthesis to store solar energy as carbohydrates. Then animals use respiration to release that energy for their own purposes. Herbivores eat plants, carnivores eat herbivores. Omnivores seem to be able to eat just about anything. So humans are, in a way, solar-powered. But the energy transfer between levels in the energy pyramid is not very efficient. Let's just see how efficient it is. This diagram shows you how much energy is transferred between the different links in the food chain. So why is energy transfer so inefficient? Where does all the energy go? A typical newborn infant, 30 centimetres long and weighing about 4 kilograms. Over the next 20 years, that infant is going to grow. Let's say he or she eventually reaches 1 metre, 60 centimetres tall and 70 kilograms in weight. 70 kilograms of meat and bone represents a lot of stored joules, but only a very small fraction of the total number of joules that you would consume in a lifetime of breakfasts, lunches, dinners, and midnight raids on the refrigerator. We use energy every second that we are alive, and that energy must be replaced, or we will grind to a halt and eventually die. So what, other than growth, do we need energy for? This student is comparing energy intake in the food he ate with the energy output of the different activities he carried out. How would you analyse your energy input and output? A certain proportion of our daily energy intake in the food we eat is used to perform physical work. Some activities use up more energy than others, and the more energy you use, the higher the rate of respiration. Today, the A-team tackled the assault course at Basingbourne Barracks. Our subjects had porridge for breakfast this morning and toast. In other words, they've been browsing on oats and wheat. The chemical energy stored in the oats and the wheat has been turned into several different forms of energy. Potential energy, kinetic energy, and a lot of heat and noise. later that same day. Now the A-team are sitting around watching television, but they're still using up energy. So what's it being used for? Some of the ways in which we use up energy aren't all that obvious. Even sleeping uses energy. And why should that be? When you're sleeping, you're resting, but you are still using energy. How? And what for? We use a lot of energy simply keeping warm, at 37 degrees centigrade to be precise, and a lot of that warmth is eventually lost into the surrounding air, which is one good reason for wearing clothes. These images were recorded using thermography. The hotter the surface, the lighter the colour. You can see that this man has cold feet, a warm stomach, warmer neck and face, hot eyes, and a cold nose. This technique has no colour, but it does have higher definition. You can see the nostrils warm up each time the man breathes out. And we will leave you with a question. Why do we wear most of our hair on our head? Growth, physical work, and heat loss are relatively easy to understand. But where do the repairs and the maintenance fit in? Animals and plants are highly complex life forms, and they depend on regular repairs and maintenance to look after all the types of cells in their bodies. Heart cells, beating a steady rhythm from before we are born right up until the moment we die. Cells with cilia, found deep inside the lungs, where they work constantly to sweep dust and bacteria out of the airways. Cells that move like amoebae through the body, hunting and destroying infectious bacteria. Here you can see one moving in for the kill. And here's another, about to swallow a yeast cell. These are red blood cells. They transport oxygen throughout the body, and like all the other cells, eventually wear out and have to be replaced. Energy must be constantly transferred from the food we eat to all the cells that we have seen, so that they can carry out their specialized tasks, to enable the whole organism to remain in balance with its surroundings, to move, to grow, and eventually to reproduce. Which takes us back to the A-team. By now, you should be able to construct a graph matching their energy intake, output, and activity. You know by now that there will be some energy consumption even during sleep, though not as much as is being used here. Here's the repairs and maintenance we talked about earlier, and maintaining body temperature. Aha! They've woken up, just sitting around and having breakfast by the looks of it. Energy consumption going up again. That's the assault course. Now you can see them winding down. Now they're watching television. How are they going to replace all that energy? How are they going to replace all that energy? How are they going to replace all that energy?